Happy Tuesday, everyone. Let's do the news. And in doing the news, let's hop across the pond. First, I hope everyone is doing all right. I want to give a shout out to Sham Sharma for coming on to the show to discuss Tulsi Gabbard. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. I'm going to be on his show next week on Tuesday at 1 p.m., essentially the exact same time, just on his channel. So definitely check me out then. I'm not quite sure what the topic is going to be, but I'm pretty sure we'll talk about something. We got along extraordinarily well. Let's hop across the pond. There are events that are taking place in Britain right now that needs to be paid attention to. At least I think so. This channel has paid attention to those things because I think those things are important. Theresa May has come back to give more information on what she's trying to do from the standpoint of Brexit. Now, if you remember, her Brexit bill was voted down, her withdrawal agreement, voted down. Historic numbers. She comes back with a plan B. Now, plan B is essentially plan A. Now, one of the things that she does, she takes a U-turn, however, and she tells them to vote down her own Brexit plan. Essentially repudiate the plan that she put out and spent 2 years crafting. Now, what she was going to do on this, in repudiation of this, was going to go back to Brussels with a mandate and tell Brussels that they need to change the withdrawal agreement. Essentially, they need to get rid of the backstop. Europe has been very clear that this is a non-starter and this is a flat-out no. There is no leeway with this. This answer is no. We're not touching the agreement. The agreement is what the agreement is. But she believes, for whatever reason, that the concessions that she couldn't get for several months now, that she is somehow going to get these things. So in believing these magical things, Theresa May has gone supposedly with having these conversations with the EU. She's coming back to give Parliament a heads up on what's taking place, essentially updates. I'm going to show you Theresa May's speech, and I'm going to show you Jeremy Corbyn's rebuttal to that. I haven't watched this. This goes back to the old days where I would sit here and watch a show with you. So let's watch this together. I got to be honest, I already kind of jumped to the ending on this to get other feedback on this from the various stations that was covering this event. I'm not going to clue you in. I'm going to let it be a mystery on what Theresa May is going to say. But you already know what the European Union has said, so that gives you some leeway in regards to what Theresa May is going to say. So heads up. Let's take a look at this. This should be interesting to hear. A case of failure. A case of active, complete failure at a goal. We've all failed. So, not to mention, it was somewhat of an impossible task. Let's take a look. Theresa May addressing Parliament, I guess you can say the House, on the Brexit negotiations. What have you done up to this point, and where are we with those negotiations? That's what we're about to watch.
Government's ongoing work to secure a Brexit deal that honours our commitments to the people of Northern Ireland, commands the support of Parliament and can be negotiated with the EU. On the 29th of January, this House gave me a clear mandate and sent an unequivocal message to the European Union. Last week, I took that message to Brussels. I met President Juncker, President Tusk, and the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, and I told them clearly what Parliament wanted in order to unite behind a withdrawal agreement, namely legally binding changes to the backstop. And I explained to them the three ways in which this can be achieved. First, the backstop could be replaced with alternative arrangements to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. Yesterday, my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, met with Michel Barnier to discuss the ideas put forward by the Alternative Arrangements Working Group, comprised of a number of my Honourable and Right Honourable friends. I'm grateful to that group for their work, and we are continuing to explore their ideas. Secondly, there could be a legally binding time limit to the existing backstop. Or third, there could be a legally binding unilateral exit clause to that backstop. Given both sides agree we do not ever want to use the backstop, and that if we did it would be temporary, we believe it is reasonable to ask for legally binding changes to this effect. Mr. Speaker, as expected, President Juncker maintained the EU's position that they will not reopen the withdrawal agreement. And I set out the UK's position, strengthened by the mandate that this House gave me, that this House needs to see legally binding changes to the backstop, and that can be achieved by changes to the withdrawal agreement. We both agreed that our team should hold further talks to find a way forward, and he and I will meet again before the end of February to take stock of those discussions. So our work continues. The Secretary of State and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster are today in Strasbourg, and last week the Attorney-General was in Dublin to meet his Irish counterpart. And following my own visits to Brussels, Northern Ireland and Ireland last week, I welcomed the Prime Minister of Malta to Downing Street yesterday, and I will be speaking to other EU27 leaders today and throughout the week. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, shares the concerns of this House on the backstop. I welcome his willingness to sit down and talk to me, and I look forward to continuing our discussions. Indeed, government ministers will be meeting with members of his team tomorrow. I think there are a number of areas where the whole House should be able to come together. In particular, I believe we have a shared determination across this House not to allow the UK leaving the EU to mean any lowering of standards in relation to workers' rights, environmental protections or health and safety. I have met trade unions and with members from across the House, and my Right Honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is leading work to ensure that we fully address all concerns about these vital issues. We've already made legally binding commitments to no regression in these areas if we were to enter the backstop, and we are prepared to consider legislating to give these commitments force in UK law. And in the interests of building support across the House, we're also prepared to commit to asking Parliament whether it wishes to follow suit whenever the EU changes its standards in these areas. And of course, we don't need to automatically follow EU standards in order to lead the way, as we have done in the past under both Conservative and Labour governments. The UK has a proud tradition of leading the way in workers' rights. The UK has a proud tradition of leading the way in workers' rights, whilst maintaining a flexible labour market that has helped deliver an employment rate almost 6 percentage points above the EU average. Successive governments of all parties have put in place standards that exceed the minimum set by the EU. A Labour government gave British workers annual leave and paid maternity leave entitlements well above that required by the European Union. A Conservative-led government went further than the EU by giving all employees the right to request flexible working. And I was proud to be the Minister for Women and Equalities to introduce shared parental leave so that both parents are able to take on caring responsibilities for their child, something no EU regulation provides for. When it comes to workers' rights, this Parliament has set a higher standard before, and I believe will do so in the future. Indeed, we already have plans to repeal the so-called Swedish derogation, which allows employers to pay their agency workers less, and we're committed to enforcing holiday pay for the most vulnerable workers. Not just protecting workers' rights, but extending them. As I set out in my statement 2 weeks ago, the House also agrees that Parliament must have a much stronger and clearer role in the next phase of the negotiations. Because the political declaration cannot be legally binding and in some areas provides for a spectrum of outcomes, some members are understandably concerned that they cannot be sure precisely what future relationship it would lead to. By following through on our commitments and giving Parliament that bigger say in the mandate for the next phase, we are determined to address those concerns. The Secretary of State has written to all members of the Exiting the EU Committee, seeking their view on engaging Parliament in this next phase of negotiations. And we're also reaching out beyond this House to engage more deeply with businesses, civil society and trade unions. Everyone in this House knows that the vote for Brexit was not just about changing our relationship with the EU, but changing how things work at home, especially for those in communities who feel they have been left behind. Addressing this and widening opportunities is the mission of this government that I set out on my first day as Prime Minister. And I will continue to work with members across the House to do everything we can to help build a country that works for everyone. But, Mr. Speaker, one area where the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, and I do not agree is on his suggestion that the UK should remain a member of the EU Customs Union. I would gently point out that the House of Commons has already voted against this. And in any case,
a lot of noise and heckling, but the record shows that everyone gets a chance to question the Prime Minister. I think it is right that she should have a proper and respectful hearing, and the same courtesy must be extended to the Leader of the Opposition in due course. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, as I say, I would gently point out that the House of Commons has already voted against this. And in any case, membership of the Customs Union would be a less desirable outcome than that which is provided for in the political declaration. That would deliver no tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions across all sectors, and no checks on rules of origin. But crucially, it would also provide for the development of an independent trade policy for the UK that would allow us to strike our own trade deals around the world, something the Labour Party once supported. On Thursday, as I promised in the House last month, we will bring forward an amendable motion. This will seek to reaffirm the support of the House for the amended motion from the 29th of January, namely to support the government in seeking changes to the backstop and to recognise that negotiations are ongoing. Having secured an agreement with the European Union for further talks, we now need some time to complete that process. When we achieve the progress we need, we will bring forward another meaningful vote. But if the government has not secured a majority in this House in favour of a withdrawal agreement and a political declaration, then the government will on Tuesday the 26th of February make a statement and table an amendable motion relating to the statement, and a minister will move that motion on Wednesday the 27th of February, thereby enabling the House to vote on it and on any amendments to it on that day. Mr. Speaker, as well as making clear what is needed to change in the withdrawal agreement, the House has also reconfirmed its view that it does not want to leave the EU without a deal. The government agrees, but opposing the deal is not enough to stop it. We must agree, opposing no deal is not enough to stop it. We must agree a deal that this House can support, and that is what I am working to achieve. I've spoken before about the damage that would be done to public faith in our democracy if this House were to ignore the result of the 2016 referendum. In Northern Ireland last week, I heard again the importance of securing a withdrawal agreement that works for all the people of this United Kingdom. In Belfast, I met not just with politicians, but with leaders of civil society and businesses from across the community. Following this House's rejection of the withdrawal agreement, many people in Northern Ireland are worried about what the current uncertainty will mean for them. In this House, we often focus on the practical challenges posed by the border in Northern Ireland. But for many people in Northern Ireland, what looms larger is the fear that the seamless border between Ireland and Northern Ireland that helped make the progress which has followed the Belfast Agreement possible might be disrupted. We must not let that happen, and we shall not let that happen. The talks are at a crucial stage, and we now all need to hold our nerve to get the changes this House requires and deliver Brexit on time. By getting the changes we need to the backstop, by protecting and enhancing workers' rights and environmental protections, and by enhancing the role of Parliament in the next phase of negotiations, I believe we can reach a deal that this House can support. We can deliver for the people and the communities that voted for change 2.5 years ago and whose voices for too long have not been heard. We can honour the result of the referendum, and we can set this country on course for the bright future that every part of this United Kingdom deserves. That is this government's mission. We shall not stint in our efforts to fulfil it, and I commend this statement to the House.
All right, that was Theresa May's statement to the House. Well, as she called it, I commend the statement to the House. Politicians often are verbose and using a lot of words. I'm not necessarily hitting them for this. They use a lot of words that are fluff and filler, and making those words can often mean anything. They're flexible terms. They're flexible terms because they kind of want to hide behind those terms. This speech, similar to that. I mean, ultimately, what has she told you in this speech that has changed from prior, speeches on this issue? Nothing. I went to the European Union. I'm having negotiations with the European Union. I need more time. She even said it explicitly at one point. We need more time to try to secure essentially what we're trying to secure, meaning getting rid of the backstop, the Irish backstop in the withdrawal agreement. That's her mission. That's what she's trying to accomplish. She stated the fact that that's what she's trying to accomplish, to say, I am in the process of doing just that. And makes the point that, we don't want a no-deal Brexit, but in order for us to have a no-deal Brexit, we need to actually vote on something. Something needs to be put forth that we can vote on, that we can agree on. Otherwise, we will have that no-deal Brexit. The problem with this is she's saying, by the 26th, I will come back to this house and give another statement on progress. And if we don't have anything, then I'll give you guys a vote on when we can have that vote on the 27th. Britain is set to leave at the end of March. I think it's like March 29th. They need to have something in place within 1 month leaving the European Union. Otherwise, they're going to crash out in this kind of helter-skelter Brexit. Oh, man, that just looks bad. They've been negotiating this for 2 years. 2 years. And the deal that they bring forth, they kept telling her over and over and over again to bring your deal forth. In fact, they even told her before you even go to the European Union, you should bring your deal before Parliament to see if it'll pass. Because all of them knew it wasn't going to pass. Her going to Parliament and trying to get it, to the European Union and coming up with a withdrawal agreement with the European Union that can't pass her own Parliament. God, that's a level of incompetence. You've been negotiating this for 2 years. Now, you can make a case that people should have known to try to figure out what Brexit meant before engaging in this idea of Brexit. All of that is true, but you got what you got. And the Prime Minister is stuck with a plan that is dead in the water. The European Union has said over and over again. When the Prime Minister was standing up to give Plan B and was telling her people to repudiate her own bill, the ridiculous situation to which the person is in, to repudiate her own bill, the European Union was standing up, saying at that very moment, putting a knife in her, saying this is dead on arrival. The withdrawal agreement was negotiated. We're not going to open the withdrawal agreement in order to change the Irish backstop. There's nothing to say here, folks. If you notice, even in the beginning of this, she said the European Union is maintaining the position that the European Union had beforehand. We're not opening withdrawal agreement. Kick rocks. Now, you can say the European Union is bluffing with a month to go. Maybe. I'm skeptical of that, but maybe. People sometimes soften their positions when you get up to the hard border, because at that point you know that the people are really going to mean it. Which person is going to go over the cliff? Which person is going to blink? That type of stuff. So that is amply possible. So fair enough. But up to this point, they've shown no, reluctance of abandoning position at all. Their position has been, we're not changing this. Kick rocks. Let's hear Jeremy Corbyn give his appraisal of this. So yeah, they're going to bring it back for a vote. She needs more time in order to not have a no-deal Brexit. You got to vote on something. They need something that's passed the House. That point, I agree with her on. I even agree with her on the point that the public voted for something, and in order to have public trust in the institution of Parliament itself, meaning, is it really a democracy? I understand they have a monarch, but for all intents and purposes, is it really a representative government? Let's say it that way. And the test of that, to some degree, is whether or not you would implement the will of the public. The will of the public being Brexit. Whatever you think of Brexit. You can think it's a horrible thing. You can think it's not necessarily the best interest of the country. You can say it was done under false pretense. Whatever you want to say. At the end of the day, there was a referendum that was held, and the public decided they wanted to leave. Is there public trust in the institution or not? Meaning, are you going to fulfill the obligations of the public? I agree with her on that point. People ding me for that, but I agree with her on that point. Let's take a look at Corbyn's reply. She's taking questions. This went on for like 3 hours. But I'm only going to give her and Jeremy Corbyn, and I'll put the link to it at the bottom. Hopefully they don't ding this video as is for showing this. So We'll see. All right, let's hear the rebuttal for Jeremy Corbyn, or the perspective of the opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I usually thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement, but it was handed to me just as I was leaving my office to come down here, so I can only assume she entrusted it to the Transport Secretary to deliver it to me. Mr. Speaker, our country is facing the biggest crisis in a generation, and yet the Prime Minister continues to recklessly run down the clock. We were promised there would be a deal last October. It didn't happen. We were promised a meaningful vote on a deal in December. It didn't happen. We were told to prepare for a further meaningful vote this week after the Prime Minister again promised to secure significant and legally binding changes to the backstop, and that hasn't happened. Now the Prime Minister comes before the House with more excuses and more delays. In her statement, the Prime Minister has failed to answer even the most basic questions. What progress has she made on identifying and working up the alternative arrangements? Have they been presented to the European Union? If not, when will they be presented? And will she set them out before this House and ask for its approval of them? In truth, Mr. Speaker, it appears the Prime Minister has just one real tactic: to run down the clock, hoping members of this House are blackmailed into supporting a deeply flawed deal. This, Mr. Speaker, is an irresponsible act. She's playing for time and playing with people's jobs, our economic security and the future of our industries. Yesterday, growth figures show the lowest growth since 2012, our manufacturing sector mired into recession. The decision by Nissan last week to pull its investment from the Sunderland plant may only be the thin end of a very long wedge. Uncertainty and failing confidence in this government to deliver are putting jobs at risk. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Business Secretary will be hearing the same warnings as I am, that several major large manufacturers, household names employing tens of thousands of people, are poised to follow in Nissan's footsteps. Earlier today, we heard from the Leader of the House that the next meaningful vote may not happen until after the EU summit on the 21st of March, just days before Brexit is due to happen. If, Mr. Speaker, this is not the case, can the Prime Minister tell the House today when the meaningful vote will be? We also learned from the Leader of the House that any changes to the backstop won't be written into the legally binding withdrawal agreement. Can the Prime Minister confirm that? Is the Prime Minister really prepared to risk people's livelihoods, jobs and investment in a desperate attempt to push a deeply flawed deal through Parliament? The Prime Minister has just told members of this House to hold their nerve. Tell that to Nissan workers in Sunderland and the thousands more worried about their job security and the future of their communities. Mr. Speaker, no minister serious about protecting jobs in this country would allow a Prime Minister to deliberately run down the clock and play chicken with people's livelihoods. To stand by and do nothing would be a complete dereliction of duty. As I received, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's letter yesterday in response to Labour's Brexit plan, it became clearer to me the Prime Minister is merely engaged in the pretence of working across Parliament to find solutions. She has not indicated she will move one iota away from her rejected deal or any of her red lines. On the backstop, the Prime Minister has pointed out Labour also has concerns. But let's make no mistake about it, that has never been a major issue with the Prime Minister's deal. Indeed, in order to stop the UK falling into the backstop, we need a permanent customs union, and a strong single market deal. That is the key, Mr. Speaker, to maintaining an open border on the island of Ireland. That is key to protecting jobs, industry and living standards in this country. That is why it's backed by businesses who employ and trade unions who represent millions of workers in this country. And to correct the Prime Minister's claim in her statement, we want to negotiate a new UK-EU customs union, as I set out in my letter. The Prime Minister says there is no need to negotiate a customs union, as her deal provides for the benefit of being in one. I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that is simply not the case. The deal the Prime Minister negotiated means there will be barriers to trade in goods. And there will not be frictionless trade, putting manufacturers across the country at a huge disadvantage. This is made quite clear in the political declaration, especially when it says, and I quote, "The parties will form separate markets and distinct legal orders," and concedes that, and I quote, "can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes for administrative processes as well as checks and controls." Nothing is secured. The Prime Minister is also trying to win support for her deal by promising to protect workers' rights after Brexit. Well, Mr. Speaker, just look at the record of the party opposite. Yes, that's right, Jeremy. They attacked trade union rights through the Trade Union Act. They kept this House up all night opposing the minimum wage in 1997. They're the party that introduced employment tribunal fees and introduced the public sector pay cap. For many of them, Mr. Speaker, ripping up rights is what Brexit is all about. Take the Secretary of State for International Trade. He once wrote, "It's too difficult to hire and fire, too expensive to take on new employees," and went on to say, "It is intellectually unsustainable to believe that workplace rights should remain untouchable." Yes. That was the Secretary of State for Trade. No wonder trade union leaders like Tim Roach of the GMB, Francis O'Grady, the Secretary of the TUC, have rejected the Prime Minister's inadequate pledges. And it's vital too, Mr. Speaker, that we keep pace with the best consumer safeguards and environmental protections, as if the warnings of the destruction of our biodiverse natural life are not serious enough. We have to be very serious about all environmental protections and indeed make them much stronger. Mr. Speaker, there is a sensible way forward, but the Prime Minister is refusing to listen. Labour's alternative has been widely welcomed as a way of breaking the impasse. From business leaders, European leaders, and even from some Conservative MPs. But the Prime Minister refuses to listen. Mr. Speaker, I urge all members across this House to think about the damage the Prime Minister's strategy is doing. The threat to industry and skilled jobs and communities all across this country. Now is not the time to stand idly by. Now is the time to stand up and do the right thing, to rule out no deal and back Labour's alternative plan.
All right, so this is Jeremy Corbyn pushing back on what the Prime Minister is. And by the way, I agree with him on this. This does feel like running down the clock, where you're trying to put a pressure situation of my deal or no deal, and you know the people have no nerve at all for a no-deal Brexit. They may clumsily fall ass backwards into a no-deal Brexit, but many of the people here fully understand that it's going to be a political and economic impact of leaving the European Union without any kind of deal. So this thing of, all right, you have this imperfect deal or no deal, which one do you want? You can imagine some people may be pressured into taking the imperfect deal in order to avoid the no-deal Brexit. That's the first point. So I agree with him on that. And I love the way he's like, the threat. So there's that. As for the customs union, if I'm not mistaken, Juncker agrees with Corbyn on the customs union point. And you must understand the problem that the Prime Minister is running into on this is somewhat of a puzzle. Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is part of the European Union. Northern Ireland, not so much. So you have this weird thing of there's supposed to be no border between these things based on the Good Friday Agreement. And if there's not supposed to be a border between these things, how are you going to maintain regulatory alignment? Meaning, how are you going to ensure that the items that are coming from Northern Ireland going into the Republic of Ireland, one being part of the European Union, the other at this point not, meaning Britain, how do you ensure that those things meet your standards if you don't have a border between those things to ensure that your standards are being met? Well, fact of the matter is you can't. They've come up with all these, she's like, we're going to have a technological solution that doesn't exist to handle it. Okay, well, they're not accepting the magical solution idea. So how do you deal with it? What you end up with is a border between, you end up with a checkpoint between a border, which is forbidden at this point. So Theresa May is trying to square that circle. That's not necessarily the easiest circle to square. The customs union solves that issue. What also solves the issue is giving Northern Ireland back to the Republic of Ireland and allowing Ireland to unify. But Theresa May's government will collapse if she does so because she's being propped up by a Northern Ireland party. So there's that. I agree with on that point. I agree with him on another point, the spectrum of outcomes. Many of the Brexiteers who were heavy into this idea of leaving the UK, leaving the European Union, they weren't doing it because they thought it was just great to leave the European Union. They weren't doing it necessarily out of xenophobic tropes, even though they may have used xenophobic tropes to do so. Some of us had a financial motive, meaning we can cut regulation to the bone, that the European Union is preventing us from implementing a helter-skelter plan for Britain. Essentially cutting the regulations, be it through environment, worker protections, to the bone. But they don't have to attenuate themselves to the European Union anymore, so it doesn't necessarily have to be at a particular point. Jeremy Corbyn is right on this. The Tory government is not to be trusted on these things. And so you can imagine that being unrestricted by anything else, what would a Tory government do to the standpoint of regulations? Safety standards. These are things that are problematic. Also, in the second point of losing access to the single market. Even if Britain retains some relationship to the European Union, if Britain wants and decides that it wants to stop doing things a particular way, it can do that. But in doing so, it may lose access to the single market because it doesn't necessarily meet its regulatory standards. It's almost like it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you want to play in this particular league, you have to play by these rules. Let me give Theresa May her rebuttal to this because it is Prime Minister questions, and for the most part, you can say this is a response to the Prime Minister. So I'm pretty sure she's going to want to respond to this, and I'll let that be the end of this one.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned the announcement that's been made by Nissan. I think for this House it's important to recognise that Nissan have confirmed that none of the current 7,000 jobs at the plant will be lost. They remain committed to the UK, and indeed, they will be making more capital will be invested in Sunderland than was originally planned in 2016. The Right Honourable Gentleman asked me about progress on alternative arrangements and asked whether these were going to be put before the European Commission. Can I remind him what I said in my statement, which was, yesterday my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, met with Michel Barnier to discuss the ideas put forward by the Alternative Arrangements Working Group, comprised of a number of my Honourable and Right Honourable friends. I think that answers his question. He talked about Labour's proposal. I referenced the issue of the customs union in my statement. But of course he also talks about being a member of the single market. Being a member of the single market means accepting free movement. One of the things that people voted for when they voted to leave the European Union was to bring an end to free movement, and that is what this government will deliver. He asked about dates for the process for votes that are going to take place in this House. I set those out in my statement as well. Yep. He referenced businesses quite a lot. Of course, businesses backed the deal, and he talks. They did. He talked about uncertainty. He talked about uncertainty. Of course, the best way to end uncertainty is to vote for a deal. And he talked about running down the clock. No, I wanted to have this sorted before Christmas. I bought a deal back from the rest of Christmas.
Order! Mr. Matheson, I have nurtured for a long time an ambition to see you become a statesman. I think you are threatening that prospect by these noisy gesticulations. Calm, Buddha-like. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The deal was negotiated before Christmas, so I wasn't it's not me who's trying to run down the clock. And it's no good Labour members who voted against the deal pointing their fingers across the House. Every time somebody votes against a deal, the risk of no deal increases. And the right honourable gentleman talked about acting in the national interest. Yes, we should be acting in the national interest, and the national interest is in getting a deal agreed with this Parliament, through this Parliament. That is why we are working with the European Union in everything that we're doing. And the right honourable gentleman made several references in his response to the issues of businesses and the issue of jobs and of protecting jobs. The deal we negotiated with the European Union, we're going back to deal with this issue of the backstop, but the deal we've negotiated, the political declaration that sets out the future, is a deal that protects jobs. And the one thing that we know would threaten jobs in this country would be a Labour government.
Mr. Kenneth.
Jobs are a threat, man. I mean, when people use that, it's a buzzword of sorts. It's essentially making this point of you're not going to have access to your needs if this person gets in office. Both parties do it, whether you're in the United States or, in this case, in the UK. But that's why they use that. I mean, there's a reality to it, meaning in our system, a job is the thing that allows a certain degree of liberation. You know, yes, it's a chain around your throat, but it also allows a certain degree of agency within the society. Pay for your kids, pay for yourself, pay for your needs, etc., etc. Using that as a tagline, those immigrants are taking our jobs. Why are they saying those immigrants are taking our jobs? Because they think that you need the ability to feed and clothe yourself, and without those jobs, you lose that capacity. So saying that is usually this thing of a threat. Jeremy Corbyn does that too when he says, you know, the Labour government, the Conservative government is going to lose jobs and businesses are backing my interests. And why is he saying businesses are backing my interests? Because I get jobs. That's the first point. I guess the Prime Minister's, response to it is basically, yes, I'm going back to get more time. It's like, I'm pushing back on some of the stuff he's saying. It's like Jeremy Corbyn said this, and here's a response. Look, for all of the bluster between the two sides in this particular speech, and this goes on for, like I said, 3 hours. What it boils down to is the Prime Minister doesn't have anything yet. She's still trying to get the European Union to change its position. It has not. And that she needs more time. And that she is going to come back to give an update on the 26th of February. Again, they leave in March. They have almost 1 month, a little bit more than a month. I think like 44 days. To figure out what Brexit means. Think about that. This has been going on for 2 years. And they're still trying to figure out, what does it mean? What does Brexit mean? And that's what the Prime Minister is trying to figure out. And trying to get people to support. This is a fascinating series of events, man. It's fucking amazing. Let's see who's here. I'm gonna end this one because this one has gone real long. But what I like these videos. I don't like sound bites. I guess you could do a sound bite. Sometimes I use them. It depends on what it is. But in the same way that I would do a speech by Elizabeth Warren, or do a speech by Sanders, or do a speech by State of the Union, I consider these things to be political events, even though they're not as tethered to me as some of the political events that are taking place in the United States. I find this to be an amazing fucking thing that's taking place in the UK. And so I kind of want to show it in a more, I guess you can say, thorough way. So I like it. All right, I will end this. Let me make sure I don't see anything and make sure there's nothing on Streamlabs. And there is not. Good, there's not. All right, guys. You all have a good one. I will see you in a few. I have another couple of stories that I want to do. I try to get 4 a day. That's my goal. I know that's a lot of shows, but still, it's my goal. All right, guys. You all have a good one. Oh, by the way, my wife and I are going to be doing patron appreciation. I'm imagining it's probably going to be Sunday again this week coming up. Those videos are done for the patrons. At the end of the video, those videos are essentially hidden and kept purely for the patrons themselves. We had a really good show last time. We had like a ton of people on that particular broadcast. So it went well. They seem to like it when she's co-hosting with me. So she will be co-hosting the next patron appreciation show also. I'll see you guys then. Thanks all.